Assalamualaikum and very good day to my supervisor, Madam Maria Miri Abdullah, and my panel, Dr. Hazmila Hassan. My name is Ridojalani bin Gefriandi from 3BTMM Section 1. Now I'm going to present my final year Project 1 with the title The Effect of Web Interface Navigation Design on Consumers' Preferences of E-commerce Websites. For my background of research is, the internet has influenced the way business is done today with the existence of online businesses. Online businesses are also known as e-commerce. Every website must have its web design. According to Westfall 2008, web design is the way content is planned, designed, and organized online. So I will study the web interface navigation design in an e-commerce website. How the web interface navigation design affect consumer preferences on e-commerce websites, and to know which elements of user interface will affect consumer preferences on e-commerce websites. There are three problem statements stated here. First, as internet connectivity and usage are increasingly growing globally, according to Daniela 2020, in 2019 itself, about 1.92 billion customers bought products or services online, and e-commerce revenues exceeded $3.5 trillion globally during the same year. One reason of the website begins to see traffic surge is user interface design. Next is poor online experience. Data by Akamai 2015 shows that almost 65% of consumers evaluate a brand with bad application experience negatively. According to infographics by Patel 2020, a poor online experience will be paid only by 44% of shoppers to their families. People not only recall negative encounters online, but refer to friends and relatives about them. Lastly is brand image. Data by Philip 2018 shows that 88% that stated after a poor user experience they will not go back to the website. As reported, users would probably inform their friends if they were disappointed with an online shopping site. Angelique 2021 says it's turned out once the user lose interest, they will not remain with the business for a long time. So that business interface navigation had better start changing immediately. Now move on to the research questions and research objectives of this topic. First is, what are the elements of the user interface of an e-commerce website? Secondly, which elements of UI is most important in attracting traffic for an e-commerce website? And lastly, which elements of UI that has most influence on consumer preferences of e-commerce websites? For the research objectives, first is to study the elements of the user interface of e-commerce websites. Secondly is to examine which elements of UI is most important in attracting traffic for e-commerce website. And lastly is to analyze which elements of UI that has most influence on consumer preferences of e-commerce websites. From this research, my expected contribution is this study will impact e-commerce on how they can use this study to understand as well as know more deeply about user preferences when browsing their website. With the knowledge of user preferences, e-commerce can further upgrade their web interface design than before. If e-commerce succeeds in upgrading their web design, then this can also provide benefits to users of the website. In addition to this report, the findings could have consequences for academic and other similar researchers for program and possible project execution. Now move on to literature review, which is theories and framework. For theories, first is e-commerce. According to Turban et al. 2004, e-commerce is the electronic mechanism by which people or groups doing trade, for example, buying, selling, transferring, or exchanging goods, services, or documentations. Next is a user interface. June 2017 defined that user interface is the interaction between a system and a user via instruction or procedures to run the system, input data, and utilize the information. For the elements of user interface, first element is input control. The graphical components of the interface are input controls by Gupta 2020. It helps users to insert data into the interface of the device. For example, a checkbox and radio buttons. Next is elements is navigation components. Yalanska 2021 explained that navigation may be broadly described as collection of activities and strategies that guide users through the app or website, allowing them to achieve their goals and effectively engage with the product. Search field, breadcrumbs, and pagination are some of the examples of navigational components in user interface. Third element is informational components. According to Hannah 2019, they assist user in comprehending unknown or foreign components that they may not be able to comprehend in the user interface. And the last element is containers. UI containers are means to collect data without forgetting information. A business can conserve space on its websites. The accordions and carousels are one example for containers. By Widdowson to 2021. From this research, I found out a few research gaps. First are knowledge gaps. Research done by Yeni Purwati 2011 found that e-commerce websites user interface from 120 companies selected are not following Nielsen criteria for de facto standard. The results do not show the effect of UI on consumer preferences on e-commerce businesses. The lack of information and past research about the user interface elements explained in the literature review also one of these research gaps. Next is methodology gaps. One of the methodology gaps is the lack of knowledge on developing an UI design model. Is to test for its research to identify the effect of UI towards user preferences of e-commerce websites. There is a study about the e-commerce user interface effective design on user trustworthiness by Egger 2001. The methodology gap here is the research did not perform a questionnaire that measure consumer on the user interface. Lastly is location gap. The location gap for this research is lack of financial resources and multi-participant support, which resulted in researcher not being able to research other countries for a more accurate study. Moreover, due to the pandemic that constructed during this study, it restricts the movement of researchers to research the entire population in Malaysia. From the literature review and referring theoretical framework by previous research, here are the conceptual framework of this research, which is independent variable are input control, navigational components, informational components, and containers. The dependent variable is consumer preferences of e-commerce websites. From the conceptual framework, these are the 4 hypotheses generated, which all the elements of user interface, which are input control, navigational components, informational components, and containers, have a significant influence on consumers' preferences of the e-commerce websites. Every research must have their own method. So now move on to the research methodology of this topic. For the research design, the research has conducted an explanatory investigation to provide precise information. According to Boru 2018, explanatory research focuses on examination of a scenario or problem to explain how two variables relate. In this study, for methodological choices, is the researcher utilized a quantitative investigative design. In contrary to qualitative research, quantitative research focuses on numerical or empirical data. Data sources of the research are from primary data and secondary data. The primary data collection method used by this research is a survey using a questionnaire, whereby the secondary data are from the books, journals, articles, and etc. For research strategy, first is survey was chosen as a study instrument by the researcher. The questionnaire will be in form of multiple choice question and Likert scale. Next is validity of the test is criterion that seeks to verify the measurements are met to measure these professional standards. A pilot test is undertaken before surveying to evaluate if the survey questions are valid or must be filled by the participants. As a result, the interpretation of the questionnaires will be illustrated the question validity for further study in this research. Sample chosen is a convenient sample. It is kind of unlike the sampling approach, which the sample is achieved through a series of persons which are easily contacted and reached. For the sample size, researcher will use sample to variable method by Hare et al., which is number of respondents based on variables. For this study, the researcher will use 20 respondents for one variable, with a total of 100 respondents. And for the data analysis, the researcher will check the data set for any missing data, then employ a statistical tool, which is a statistics package of social science (SPSS) to examine the information obtained by the questionnaires results. From there, research will perform a regression analysis. Through all the methodologies that have been described, the expected findings for this study are to be able to answer all the researchers' questions, research objective, and hypotheses that have been formulated. Through the data that will be obtained, the findings are expected that there is a relationship between variables, that is independent variables, including input control, informational components, navigational components, and containers, with the dependent variables that are consumers' preferences on e-commerce websites. That's all from me. Thank you so much for watching.